Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Anime Octopus. Today, we delve into our fanfic discussion, What If Sasuke Impregnated Naruko? Part 4. Disclaimer: the content on this channel is intended solely for entertainment and discussion purposes. I do not claim ownership of any anime footage featured in these videos. All rights and credits belong to their respective creators and copyright holders. Let's begin. Orochimaru, has Sasuke returned yet? Orochimaru, one of the legendary Sannin, was a figure who defied simple categorization. Terms like monster, devil in disguise, or insane were often used, but none truly encapsulated the complexity of his malevolence. His actions and ambitions were beyond comprehension, making him a uniquely dangerous entity. Few harbored any affection for the serpentine Sannin, and even his former teammates had long since given up any hope of redemption, opting instead to either ignore his existence or seek ways to eliminate him. Tsunade, despite her formidable strength, arguably the greatest among the three Sannin, was constrained by her responsibilities as Hokage, which kept her tied to her desk for most of the day. Jiraiya, as ever, was notoriously difficult to detach from his research, though his extensive spy network remained a well-known, albeit elusive, asset. Orochimaru had also heard whispers that Jiraiya had taken on a new apprentice, the daughter of his former student, Uzumaki Naruto. Orochimaru recalled the girl from the Chunin exams. She had been Sasuke's teammate and had displayed significant potential. He had briefly considered bestowing upon her the same gift he had given Sasuke, but her connection to Namikaze Minato and the Kyuubi made him reconsider. The implications of his cursed mark interacting with the Kyuubi were unpredictable at best. In the worst case, it might have killed her. In a less dire scenario, the Kyuubi could have manipulated the curse mark to its own advantage, rendering it beyond Orochimaru's control. The prospect intrigued him, yet time had not allowed him to explore it further after marking Sasuke. It was a pity. The blonde girl had reminded him strongly of both Uzumaki Kushina and Tsunade, no surprise, considering her lineage. "No, he hasn't," Kabuto replied, his tone tinged with suspicion. "I find it odd that he's been gone for so long. This is the longest he's stayed away since he arrived." Orochimaru chuckled, his eyes gleaming with a malevolence that would have unnerved anyone less accustomed to his presence than Kabuto. "You don't doubt that Sasuke will return, do you, Kabuto?" Orochimaru inquired, tilting his head slightly. Kabuto shook his head. "Not exactly. I just find it curious that he leaves at least once a month, and yet this time, he's been gone for 2 weeks." Orochimaru frowned slightly but nodded. "I understand your concern, but Sasuke-kun needs me to achieve his goals. He will return. I'll give him another week, and if he doesn't return by then, we'll send out some of our shinobi to check on his whereabouts." After spending some time at Haku and Zabuza's graves, Naruto and Sasuke made their way back toward the village and Tazuna's home, where Naruto had been staying since November. Naruto now carried Nariko in her arms, holding the dark-haired baby girl securely against her chest. Nariko seemed perfectly content, showing an immediate fascination with Sasuke. It wasn't surprising, after all, he was their father, and perhaps on some instinctive level, they recognized him, even though they had never seen him before that day. Sasuke, on the other hand, held Kiyoshi with a surprising natural ease, once he recovered from the shock of being handed a baby who was practically his mirror image. Naruto had never seen Sasuke so stunned, not even during their childhood. The sight was undeniably endearing. Kiyoshi stared up at Sasuke with wide, onyx eyes identical to his own and immediately reached out to touch anything within his grasp. His small hands quickly found Sasuke's hair. Naruto wasn't sure whether it was the color, the unusual style, or simply the twins' fascination with hair, but both children were always drawn to it, especially hers, Jiraiya's, and now Sasuke's. Naruto herself had always liked Sasuke's hair, often taking any opportunity to play with it. Its unique style and unexpected softness made it irresistible. But enough about hair. "Do they always sleep this much?" Sasuke asked, pulling her from her thoughts. Both babies had indeed fallen asleep in their parents' arms, Nariko nestled against her chest, and Kiyoshi resting on Sasuke's. Naruto chuckled softly. Only during the day, she replied with a smile. They have quite the set of lungs on them. They're not as fussy as they were in the first 2 weeks, though. Sasuke was overwhelmed with a deep sense of guilt as he came to grips with everything he had missed. Not only had he been absent during Naruko's pregnancy, but he had also missed the birth of his children. The thought of her facing such challenges with only Jiraiya to support her weighed heavily on his conscience. He knew she had found some solace with Tazuna's family over the last 2 months, but that did little to alleviate his guilt, especially knowing that he would soon have to leave again. As he gazed at her cradling their raven-haired daughter, who was dressed in a dark pink outfit adorned with the Uchiha clan's fan, he was struck by a deep longing to stay. Yet, amidst the guilt, he also felt a warmth, knowing that Naruko had chosen to give their children his name. Given that they weren't born in Konoha, she wasn't obligated by any law to name them after his clan. Considering she was the last of 2 clans as ancient and esteemed as his own, she could have easily named them Uzumaki or Namikaze. But she had chosen to honor the Uchiha name, even going so far as to have the clan's symbol sewn into their clothing. Not everyone would have made such a choice. "I'm sorry I wasn't here," Sasuke murmured, before his pride could suppress the words he needed to say. Naruko grinned at him, her blue eyes sparkling with understanding. "I know, and I don't blame you. Honestly, a part of me was relieved you weren't here," she confessed, looking down as if ashamed. "I was so confused for a while. I was afraid those nights didn't mean as much to you as they did to me. I feared you might reject us." Sasuke clenched his jaw, uncertain of how to respond. Her words made him feel even worse, but he also understood her fears. Naruko had always carried insecurities, stemming from a childhood marred by the village's animosity. But he wasn't angry with her. "I wouldn't have. Those nights meant just as much to me. I wouldn't have returned otherwise," he replied, allowing a small smile to touch his lips, a smile he had only ever shown to Naruko since Itachi's betrayal and the massacre of their clan. "I'm glad," Naruko said, her voice brimming with happiness and relief. "Uro-sennin kept telling me I was worrying too much. Even Kakashi seemed to think so." Sasuke blinked in surprise. "Kakashi?" he asked. "He knows as well?" Naruko sighed softly. "Not by my choice, exactly. About a month before I had them, he was on a mission and decided to visit Tazuna and his family. He saw me, and it was pretty obvious I was pregnant, so I had to tell him. He promised to keep it to himself until I was ready to return to Konoha and inform everyone." Sasuke nodded in understanding. "Good. The fewer people who know, the better," he agreed, and Naruko nodded in concurrence. As they approached the house, Naruko bit her lip nervously. Sasuke. Jiraiya might not be too welcoming." Sasuke smirked. "I expected that," he replied as they stopped at the front door. "Don't worry, I'm prepared." Naruko nodded and opened the door, stepping inside. "I'm home, and I brought someone with me," she called out as she removed her shoes and slipped into house slippers. Sasuke followed suit, out of respect for Tazuna's family and out of habit. "Oh good, I'll have dinner ready soon if you want to help after putting the twins down." Tsunami called from what Sasuke assumed was the kitchen. "Oi, brat, you're back." Sasuke stepped into the living room behind Naruko and waited for the white-haired Sannin to look up from the scroll he was studying. "Tazuna has finished a plan for the bridge connecting Uzu no Kuni to." Jiraiya abruptly halted his speech when he glanced up, only to see Naruto holding one of the twins while a taller boy stood beside her, cradling the other. It took him only a moment to recognize the boy. "Uchiha Sasuke." "You," Jiraiya nearly growled. Sasuke couldn't resist a slight smirk. "Indeed," he replied, his tone dry. The Sannin rose to his feet, his glare fixed on Sasuke, a deep frown forming as he noticed Sasuke holding one of the twins. Jiraiya wasn't certain whether his displeasure stemmed from Sasuke holding Kyoshi or from the fact that it meant he couldn't strike him. Judging by the Toad Sannin's expression, Sasuke assumed the latter. "If you harm Naruto in any way again, I will ensure you regret that your brother didn't finish you off before leaving Konoha, Jiraiya declared, unconcerned with the possibility of his words evoking painful memories for the Uchiha. If it weren't for Kyoshi in your arms, I'd beat the traitor right out of you. Sasuke's smirk widened, and he nodded slightly. I understand. I give you my word as the Uchiha heir that I will not harm her, Kyoshi, or Naruko. Jiraiya scrutinized him for a moment before giving a reluctant nod. Very well, but don't mistake this for my approval. I'm only tolerating your presence because Naruto wants you here. And I know she'd be upset if I chased you out of town, he muttered as he resumed his seat. Now sit down, both of you. Naruto, we need to discuss the bridge and the reconstruction of Uzushio and its surrounding areas. Sasuke raised an inquisitive eyebrow at Naruto. She chuckled softly and nodded. Of course, sensei, she responded, then turned to Sasuke. I'll explain later. Sasuke nodded, following Naruto to the bassinets, where he assumed the twins were meant to rest. Later, Naruto explained to Sasuke what Jiraiya had meant by the construction and her mother's homeland. He wasn't entirely surprised by how long they had stayed in Uzu no Kuni and Uzushio before coming to Nami no Kuni, and he could understand her strong connection to the whirlpool. If he were in her position, he'd want to restore his ancestral lands too, even if they had been lost long before he was born. She elaborated that she had hired Tazuna to build a bridge connecting one side of Uzu no Kuni to Nami no Kuni. The project was to be kept confidential, with only the Wave Daimyo being privy to the details. The Daimyo had already granted permission, expressing interest in re-establishing an alliance with the newly restored whirlpool. Sasuke was surprised to learn that Naruto, once she came of age, would essentially become the daimyo of her own country. However, she had merely laughed off the notion. She assured him that she intended to continue living in Konoha and had no desire to relocate to Uzu no Kuni. Her acceptance of the daimyo title, she explained, was merely a strategic political move. To restore her mother's lands to their former glory, she recognized the necessity of claiming her full inheritance as the last Uzumaki heir. Ensuring that the devastation of an invasion would never occur again, she and Jiraiya dedicated themselves to the study of seals with renewed vigor. Though Naruto possessed a natural aptitude for seals, she was not yet a master. However, Jiraiya's confidence in her abilities assured her that mastery was within her reach. Their first course of action involved placing defensive seals around the bridge to ward off those with malicious intent. In addition to detection seals, they would implement trap seals as an added precaution. Should any adversaries breach these defenses, an alarm seal would activate, alerting her to potential danger. The bridge was strategically located at the rear of Uzu no Kuni, in the only area where constructing such a structure was feasible due to the surrounding whirlpools. Given that she intended to use the island primarily as a retreat and training ground, the likelihood of another invasion seemed remote. Perhaps, in the distant future, she might consider reopening Uzu no Kuni to the public, though she doubted she would ever need to re-establish Uzushio as anything more than a personal sanctuary for herself and her family, a private village of sorts. Sasuke agreed that her plan was sound. He also noted that becoming the daimyo of her own country would afford her greater autonomy as a Konoha ninja. This status would lessen the risk of being branded a missing nin should she choose to depart suddenly, ultimately granting her rights similar to those of a sanin. Following this discussion, Sasuke arranged for her to have a safe house on the border of Hai no Kuni and Kaze no Kuni. Owned by the Uchiha clan, this property had been constructed within the past 50 years, making it a well-kept secret known only to him. Although there was a chance Itachi was aware of its existence, Sasuke was confident that his brother would never venture there. Naruto alleviated his concerns by explaining that she could place seals around the house to render it invisible to passers-by. Should anyone manage to penetrate these barriers, additional seals would alert her to their presence. To ensure the seals did not affect him, Sasuke would need to provide a sample of his blood, a simple task that he completed before departing. With seals, many things were possible, including the preservation of essentials like food and documents through storage seals, ensuring they could be safely stored or accessed in case of emergency. Additionally, she would have Jiraiya by her side. As they sat together on the rooftop, gazing at the stars, She turned to Sasuke and asked, "How long will you be able to stay, Sasuke-kun?" "Not nearly long enough," he replied. "A day or two, maybe 3. It will take me at least 3 days to return to sound, and I've already been gone for nearly a month. If I know Orochimaru as well as I think I do, he'll give me another week, a week and a half at most." Naruto sighed, leaning her head gently on his shoulder. "I thought so," she murmured. "But it's all right. We'll see you again." Sasuke nodded in agreement, the weight of their uncertain future hanging between them. "I'll try to continue coming to you once a month, but I have to train as much as I can. I don't have the power to kill him yet, neither of them. I have to protect you, Kyoshi and Naruko." Naruto smiled, liking the fact he desired to protect anyone, considering a year or two ago she doubted the word protect was in his vocabulary with the way he commonly acted. It made that much more special to her that he wished to protect her and the twins. But she was no damsel, and she knew he knew that, so she made no move to say anything about it. "Let's go to bed," she muttered. "It's getting pretty late, now." Sasuke blinked and nodded. "I'll stay on the couch." Naruto snorted, hitting him over the head moderately hard. "Stupid team," she said, shaking her head. "You'll be sleeping in my room with me." "But," he began, only to be quieted by her slight glare and roll of her eyes. "It's not like we haven't done more than sleep before, Sasuke," she said, and jumped off the roof, and landed slightly crouched on the ground. Sasuke smiled slightly and shrugged. She was right. With that thought in mind, he jumped from the roof and landed next to her, and the two entered the house. 3 days later, Naruto had to blink rapidly to hold back a tear or two from falling as she watched Sasuke's back as he left once again. The pain she'd felt the first time she'd woken to know he was gone, after their fight at the Valley of the End, was worse than what she felt now, but she felt twinges of pain to see him go. She knew he would stay if she begged, pleaded and cried. But she knew he had to do this. In a strange way, he had a job to complete. He had vowed just before he left, and when they'd met at Haku and Zabuza's grave, to kill Orochimaru and Itachi, then return and help her deal with the last threat to them. Akatsuki. She trusted him more than anyone, despite some of the mistakes in their past, and she had her own job to do. She had to protect and care for their children and train. She had to train just as he did, to grow stronger so she wouldn't be helpless. As she'd told him before, she was no damsel in distress, she could and would save herself when given the chance. She also wasn't stupid, she knew sometimes she needed to be saved, because she was not invincible. But neither was he, she reminded herself. "You know, this reminds me of when Kushina and Minato met up with Mikoto and Fugaku a month before you were born." Sasuke had already been born, and Kushina and Mikoto were talking about if you were a girl like Kushina believed, Jiraiya said out of nowhere as she saw Sasuke disappear from sight. Kyoshi and Naruko were both held to her chest, not an easy thing to do at first, but she'd been practicing holding the twins at the same time. It was easier every day. Turning to her sensei, she raised an eyebrow. "How does this remind you of that?" she asked. Jiraiya snickered. "Well, let's just say Minato realized what having a daughter would entail and nearly went ballistic. He never stopped glaring at baby Sasuke." Naruto snorted and shook her head. Jiraiya smirked. "I wasn't finished," he said. "The whole time, according to your mother, baby Sasuke never stopped glaring at him." Naruto burst into laughter, and Kyoshi and Naruko blinked owlishly but paid no mind as they went back to playing with their mother's long, bright, loose hair. "That's ridiculous, babies don't glare," she said, but smirked widely. "Though if anyone could, I wouldn't put it past Sasuke or an Uchiha in general to pull it off." Jiraiya nodded. "Probably," he said. "Come on brats, and brats. We should get back to the house. We'll only be here another month while Tazuna and his crew finish building the bridge." Naruto nodded, and thanked whoever made the cage bunshine, because without it Tazuna and his builders would have taken longer to finish the bridge connecting Nami to Uzu. It took longer than a month before they could leave, the reason being the seals she had to put up. The last thing she needed was for it to be easy for the enemy to get to the slowly being rebuilt Uzu no Kuni. After she'd finished sealing the bridge and showing Tazuna where they were, though she hadn't shown him much more than how to get his men across to start clearing the destruction and rebuild, that the seals would only kick in if they sensed ill intent. When he's asked how they knew friend from foe, she'd tried her best to explain, but even to her the theory behind some seals confused her. "You'll visit, won't you?" Tsunami asked as Jiraiya, Naruto and the twins said their goodbyes. Well, the twins didn't say much, being only 2.5 months old. Naruto smiled. "Of course," she answered. "I don't know when, but we definitely will, Tsunami-kaken." It was a short exchange and kind of tearful for some of them, but soon they'd left Nami no Kuni behind and entered Hai no Kuni. Not wanting to be noticed in Fire Country, Naruto and Jiraiya both wore a henge. Jiraiya's was more obvious and made him look more like a normal civilian with short black hair and blue eyes. His red facial markings were gone as well, and of course his henge made it seem like his clothes were more fit for a civilian. Naruto chose a disguise simple, and maybe a little older than her current age, around 19 years old. The henge made her hair black, though the same length but a mess of waves instead of the mostly pinned straight locks. Her skin was now pale, and her eyes black, reminiscent of an Uchiha in coloring at least. Of course her now usual garb of battle kimono, the black and orange-red one, was replaced with a regular, yet almost expensive-looking, pale pink kimono with dark yellow obi and blue, darker pink and orange cherry blossoms on it. It was actually a replica of one of her kimonos that she had brought back with her from Ozushio. Unlike many of the kimonos she'd brought along, this one didn't have a spiral symbol. The reason for the henges was the twins. Hopefully they were young enough no one would look at them and scream Uchiha for all to hear. That would be the sort of rumor to end in disaster. If anyone stopped to ask, Jiraiya was her father, and they were headed to meet her husband in Wind Country. Once out of Fire Country they could do away with the disguises. The power of a simple henge, though she knew it was also easy enough for those skilled and trained to see through a henge if looking and dispel them. Though, they were making a stop at the safe house Sasuke had left directions for. They planned to stay there a few days and she'd begin placing the needed seals to keep people from seeing the home, and from getting in. "This place is a hole," Orochimaru said, as they stood back and stared at the safe house. Naruto rolled her eyes. It wasn't that bad. It just needed a tiny bit of work, it was abandoned for over a decade after all. It looked to be the size of a small home, probably no bigger than 2 or 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, living room and a bathroom. It was nestled in a clearing in a vastly wooded area. Close by was a small stream, that probably led to a river back in the direction of Wave Country, possibly one of the area's seaside countries. "It's not that bad, Orochimaru. You're just upset there is no one to peep on," she said, smirking. "Here, hold the twins." Naruto handed the 2 babies off to Jiraiya and headed for the front door of the cabin-like home. Sasuke had told her there was a defense on the place, but that she would be able to get past it with a bit of blood from the twins, something she didn't want to use, but it was the only way to ward her into the defense mechanism since it would only be lifted by an Uchiha. Since she was not one, the next closest one was him or the twins. Sasuke had spent a lot of time in the isolated Uchiha compound exploring and reading. He knew one way for someone not of Uchiha blood to get in was to use the child sired between said person and an Uchiha to sort of encode them into the complicated seal the Namikaze clan had gifted them not long after Konoha had been built. Not many realized the Uchiha had been allies with the Namikaze, mostly because they had similar enough ideals that they respected each other. Personally, Naruto didn't know much about her father's clan, she was the last of the clan though, so there wasn't much to truly know. Especially since before her, her father had been the last and many things had been lost in concern to the clan since they hadn't originated from Fire Country or Konoha. While in Konoha they had never been as large as the Uchiha, or Hyuga, but they had been just as respected because of their few and jutsu and strong shinobi. Back to the point though, Basically it would somehow take notice of the second DNA that came from her and make it so she wouldn't be rejected from any of the seals similar or this one. As for Jiraiya, she could simply let him in once she got past it. Taking a vial out of her hip pouch, Naruto walked up to the front door, careful to avoid some of the traps set up and disable them on her way. There were only 3, one was a seal trap, a basic one that she wouldn't be surprised if 5 out of 10 Jonin knew, the other 2 were tripwire. Once at the front door she poured the blood from the vial onto her hand and made sure it covered it from finger pads to the end of her palm. It made her nose twitch, and the pit of her stomach feel sick because she knew this was her baby's blood. Even if it had been taken by needle, and hadn't really hurt them, she still felt disgusted at having their blood on her hand like that. Shaking the thoughts from her head, she placed her palm on a certain part of the door where she knew the seal would be, despite it not actually showing up on the wood. Many seals that were advanced didn't without chakra flowing through it, much like the Shiki Fujin on her stomach. She felt the seal on the door warm up, and she forced her chakra into her hand and the seal. She didn't even flinch when she felt a small prick on her hand, knowing it had probably taken her blood as well to compare or join with the blood on her hand. Sometimes she had the feeling seals had some form of sentience with how strangely they worked. It took about 3 minutes before it finished glowing and the door clicked, unlocking. Pulling her hand away, she looked at it, and turned back to where Jiraiya stood with the twins. She smiled. "It's down, you can bring the twins in now. I'm going to find the kitchen, and wash my hands." Jiraiya nodded and followed Naruto inside. That night Naruto finished taking down any seals she found, minus the one on the front door, and replacing them in the traps with different seals. It was probably midnight before she sat down in the rocking chair in her room which she'd claimed. The chair sat between the cribs Tsunami had helped her get in wave and she'd unsealed along with other things the twins would need. She'd never been more happy for seals, otherwise it would be near impossible to live on the move with the twins. She'd probably buy another crib set in Wave Country and leave the one she had at the safe house. It would be the main place they'd stay, no longer just a safe home but a home away from Konoha. Looking sharply to her left as she heard the beginning of whimpering from Nariko's crib, she sighed and stood just as the crying began. This was usually the time of night they began to wake. They weren't quite at the age they slept through the night quietly, she gave it a few more weeks, or months before that. But they did sleep longer than the first month they were born. Reaching down, and pulling the raven-haired baby from the crib, Naruto was happy to notice Kyoshi still slept, and she sat back down in her rocking chair. Slowly she began a slow pace of rocking Nariko back to sleep, humming softly and singing an old whirlpool lullaby under her breath to soothe her. "Hush-a-bye, little baby, mama's here so be calm. Under the blue moon, the whirlpool drags our emotions of pain away. So sleep in my arms, and know we're safe." There was more to the lullaby, she'd found mention of it in Uzushiogakur, and she vaguely remembered it from when she was a baby. Her mother must have sung it to her just after her birth. How she could even slightly recall it was a mystery, but the moment she'd seen it, it was like a puzzle clicking into place. It was mostly just the tune she recalled. She doubted she'd have ever remembered even a sentence of the lyrics if she'd never found them in Uzushio. Naruto smiled gently as Nariko yawned widely and her blue eyes closed in sleep. Kissing her forehead lightly, Naruto continued to hum and stood in such a way as to not jar Nariko. "Sleep, Nari-chan," she said softly, and placed the baby back inside her crib and turned to go towards her own bed, which wasn't far from the cribs and rocking chair. Gaara stared at the girl in front of him in a stoic form of shock. In his life he'd never really had friends, not until he'd gone to Konoha for the Chunin exams the year before, and it was during the invasion that he'd made his first friend. It was rather strange, most didn't make friends by trying to kill them. The two of them were very much alike. Both hated by the vast majority of their villages, hated for something they didn't have any control over. They both knew the darkness of loneliness. Naruto had been lucky enough, she'd not let herself succumb to the darkness and pain. She'd striven to prove them wrong, that her existence wasn't to be the demon they claimed her to be. He had been driven to insanity. He supposed he was lucky to have his siblings though, even if the last year had been the beginning of any sort of sibling relationship between them. Naru, are those babies who I think they are? Gaara finally asked, his left brow raised. Naruto chuckled and grinned. Depends on who you think they are? She said more than asked. Gaara sighed. You and Uchiha. He trailed off and Naruto flushed slightly embarrassed as she nodded. They're my kids, and Sasuke's. Naruto had them on her lap as she sat in front of him, in the chair on the other side of his desk. The girl is Uchiha Naruko, and the boy is Uchiha Kiyoshi. Does that mean he came back on his own? He asked, hoping it was the case. Otherwise Gaara, the newly elected Kazekage of Suna, would have to question his best friend's sanity. Having a relationship with someone who by all means should already be listed as a missing nin was not something a loyal shinobi did. It was unheard of as far as he knew, and if it did happen it ended badly for all parties. To actually have children with them. Well, as he'd said, he'd never heard of it happening. Then there was the fact Uchiha had almost killed her. He'd seen her after Hatake brought her back, blood still coming from some wounds and the evidence of a still healing Chidori wound to the chest. It was obvious who'd inflicted the wounds. If not for the regeneration that was ungodly for even most Jinchuriki, he knew she'd have died before Hatake even made it to the Valley of the End. No, she muttered, sadly. I know what you must be thinking, Gaara. Sasuke will come back, he promised. Gaara saw her wrap her right arm securely around both babies in her lap and reach up to a necklace that was around her neck. The necklace had the Uchiha fan on it. It's dangerous right now for both of us. Akatsuki is after the bijou, which means me as well. Sasuke is hunting after Itachi, and I think a large part of him is terrified Itachi will come back to finish what he started, and this time it won't only be Sasuke, but the twins and myself as well. Naruto shook her head, eyes meeting his own seafoam-colored ones. There is also Orochimaru. He's been after the Sharingan for a long time, and we are both concerned that he'll come after the twins for it. Not to mention if Sasuke did suddenly return with me, he'd come looking for him and find out about them. Gaara listened carefully at the reasons and couldn't help but see her point. Both were trying to protect the other and at the same time their children from their enemies. He still didn't trust Uchiha, but he recalled how broken Naruto looked before he left for Suna after the failed retrieval mission. I see, he said. And why are you here? Shouldn't you be somewhere where you can stay with the twins and train? Naruto grinned before nodding. I guess that would be the ideal option, but Uro-sennin thinks it's better we continue to move around some. In case Akatsuki come looking. There is also something I wanted to ask you. What would that be? Gaara asked. Biting her lip, Naruto figured she'd just say it bluntly. She'd never been too good at tact anyway. I wanted to see if you'd be Naruko's godfather. I was going to ask Kakashi to be Kiyoshi's. Sakura to be Kiyoshi's godmother, and Hinata to be Naruko's godmother. Gaara's eyes actually did widen this time in surprise, having not in a million years thought that was what she wanted. A place to stay for a month or so, maybe, but that, no. Blinking, Gaara slowly smiled. It was foreign on him, he didn't recall the last time he'd showed emotion such as to smile. I would be happy too, he said, and Naruto smiled widely. Great, now do you know anywhere good to eat here? I'm starved, Naruto said, changing the subject so abruptly Gaara had to let out a quick chuckle. Another rarity with him. Standing up, Gaara nodded. I'll show you a place. Naruto blinked, looking from Gaara to the stacks of papers on his desk. What about your paperwork? Gaara looked behind him with stoic emotion, but what almost looked like a sneer. It can burn, wait, Gaara said, coughing shortly. I can finish it another time. Laughing, Naruto nodded and let Gaara escort her out of the Kazekage Tower. They spent more time in Suna than Naruto had thought they would. It wasn't exactly a hot spot for traveling Konoha ninja. The alliance between the leaf and sand was still growing from its shaky foundations after the Chunin exam the year before. So she hardly had to worry about someone stumbling upon her, the twins, or Jiraiya. If one happened to be coming by, Gaara warned her so she could stay inside and place a henge over herself in case she couldn't avoid being seen. Sunagakure was also the leading village for wind chakra affinities. It was as common in Suna as fire was in Konoha. Not surprisingly, water was the least common, though it made Naruto wonder why wind was the least common in Konoha when there wasn't a lack of wind. Maybe it was simply a coincidence that water was the rarest chakra one had in Suna, a desert where water was scarce. The water Suna drank actually came from an underground well that ran miles and miles to find the large source of water used long before Gaara or his generation was even a thought in their great-grandparents' mind. The point was, this allowed her to focus a bit more on her chakra nature. While wind was her dominant affinity, she also had minor affinities for water and knew a couple fire ninjutsus as well. The fire jutsus she knew were passed to her by Sasuke, though hers weren't as powerful since she had such a minor affinity for them, and that was through hard work and effort. The affinities she'd been born with were wind and water. Gaara had allowed them to stay in a small home fit for a family of about 4 not far from his own family estate, which wasn't overly large or fancy but was one of the largest properties in terms of Sunagakure. She had been in Suna for about 6 months now, and the twins had gotten bigger in this time and were now 7 months old. They'd begun to crawl all over the place a while ago, and learning words, or trying to anyways. They were both looking more and more like her and Sasuke each day. Speaking of Sasuke, she regretfully hadn't seen him but once in the last 7 months, and that was when she'd met him outside Suna. She knew Gaara couldn't allow Sasuke inside the village, and that he didn't trust him enough if he could allow it. So, she'd gone to the village closest to Suna, which was about 20 or so miles away. That was simply an estimate, it might have been a little more or less. She herself had changed much, though her hair had grown longer, but she decided to trim it a bit from where it nearly reached her ankles to where her calves like it had been a year ago. Many had asked why she kept her hair so long in the past, one such person having been Sakura, who had an encounter with her hair being used against her by enemy ninja. Her answer was simple: she just liked her hair long. It made the resemblance to her mother more pronounced, since the longer her hair got the more tame it became. For her it was a connection to the mother she'd never known. From pictures, her mother had kept her red hair at a similar length up until she died. Despite having stayed in Suna as she had for so long, despite Uro-senen's occasional whining, she still trained regularly. She had to continue to get stronger, to protect her family. When she couldn't be with the twins, Tamari had taken a liking to them and volunteered to watch them as long as she wasn't on a mission or busy. Thankfully, she'd worked a way to train and keep an eye on the twins at the same time. She'd never been so happy she'd learned the shadow clone before now. Usually the shadow clones trained while she trained on something non-physical, like Fuinjutsu, and made sure Naruko and Kyoshi didn't get into trouble. It wasn't easy at first, balancing the twins with training, but she'd gotten the hang of it since they were born in December. "Naruto, you okay?" Tamari asked, raising an eyebrow at the younger blonde. Tamari was one who'd taken the most interest in helping her hone her wind affinity, being a wind mistress herself. She'd even gifted her with 2-bladed hand fans, which weren't really her style at first. But then she'd never used a weapon besides her mother's katanas, and that was still a work in progress, and kunai or shuriken. Over the months, Tamari had taught her everything she knew of using a fan in battle, and Naruto would admit it made learning her wind affinity that much easier. She was also learning she could channel her water affinity through it. Though it was a lot harder to do. Especially in Suna. Even then, there were some Suiten techniques that didn't need large amounts of water to be nearby. The moisture naturally around a person usually helped most water jutsus, but it was easier when there was water nearby. Since there wasn't a lot of water in Suna, she didn't really do much with her second affinity. It didn't matter to her though. Her mother's main affinity had been water, so she had an abundance of scrolls in Konoha hidden away that had come from her mother. Some her mother had brought from Ozushio, others were creations of hers, and others were just jutsu scrolls from Konoha. Her mother was a bit of a pack rat, it seemed. "Sorry, I got lost in thought," Naruto said, smiling. "What did you ask?" "I asked you plan to take Naruko and Kyoshi with you tomorrow to meet with Uchiha?" Naruto was bothered by the fact Tamari didn't use an all that nice tone when she said Uchiha. She knew Tamari, like Gaara wasn't very fond of Sasuke. They both still held a grudge of sorts because of how much he'd hurt her in the past. Naruto smiled lightly at her friend. "I'm thinking of taking them with us," she said, knowing it was Temari who Gaara usually had escort her to the village she met Sasuke in. Sasuke hasn't seen the twins in months. Temari nodded, deciding to remain silent. She saw how much Naruto seemed to love the dark-haired Avenger, and though she didn't completely approve, she knew it was a lost cause to argue. Not only did the Uchiha and Naruto have children together, but she could see Naruto's love was true. It had to be to forgive him for everything he'd done. "Alright, I'll be ready to go around 10, if that's alright," Temari said, and Naruto nodded. "It's fine. By the way, is Kankuro watching the twins currently?" Naruto trailed off and Temari chuckled. "As far as I know, he and a Jinan team are watching them," Temari said, closing her fan. "Come on, we'll head back now. You've come pretty far with that wind jutsu though." Naruto said, "Thank you, I know I wouldn't have gotten this good using my fans if not for you." Temari nodded as Naruto secured the two-hand fans into her dark blue sash. The battle-ready kimono she wore resembled the one Temari had recently adopted, though there were slight differences. Temari's attire was a deep purple, complemented by a red sash, and she wore a pair of dark red fingerless gloves, matching the color of her sash. The striking similarities between their kimonos were almost startling at first glance. The two women walked comfortably toward the Sabaku residence, chatting about various topics along the way. Naruto found herself enjoying Suna. The heat wasn't as intolerable as she had anticipated. Despite Konoha's generally mild climate, she had never been particularly bothered by heat waves, even when a few swept through the village. The only significant weather challenges in Suna were the windstorms and the occasional intense heat waves. What Naruto appreciated most about Suna was the absence of the hostile glares she often endured in Konoha. Although the animosity had lessened over the years, it was still present, and she had grown accustomed to it. However, it was a relief to be in a place where she didn't have to constantly contend with it. "We're home," Temari announced as they entered, removing their shoes and slipping into indoor slippers. Naruto and Temari made their way into the living area, where they found Kankuro crouched in a corner, using one of his puppets as a shield. The Jinan team had long since departed, leaving Kankuro and Jiraiya to finish the remaining tasks. Naruto raised an eyebrow at Kankuro, who was muttering to himself. "Kankuro, what are you doing?" Temari asked. Moments later, Jiraiya entered with the twins and two women in their mid-20s, each clinging to his side. Naruto and Temari both blinked and slowly narrowed their eyes at the older man. Kankuro let out a bitter chuckle from his corner and remarked, "This is why I'm never babysitting again. It only leads to trouble." Naruto almost didn't grasp his meaning but quickly realized that Kankuro must have lost track of the twins, allowing Jiraiya to whisk them away. Jiraiya's eyes widened when he saw the two women had returned home. "Damn," he muttered. Kiyoshi, one of the twins, giggled and mimicked, "Damn." Despite the mispronunciation, given that Kiyoshi was only 7 months old, the word was still recognizable. Naruto's eyes nearly glowed with maternal fury. Jiraiya swallowed nervously at the sight of the aura surrounding his goddaughter. The fact that her long hair was beginning to stand up like 9 tails, a sight that reminded him of Kushina, told him he was in deep trouble. "Uro-senin." Naruto growled, her voice laced with warning. "Run." Jiraiya chuckled nervously, quickly placing one of the twins into the arms of each woman beside him before dashing towards the door. Temari sighed as Naruto chased after the toad sage, then approached the bewildered women and took the twins from them. "You can leave now," Temari said apologetically. "My apologies for Jiraiya-sama's behavior." The two women didn't say a word but promptly exited. As Temari turned back, she noticed her brother had emerged from his corner, with his puppet once again secured on his back. "Why were you in the corner, again?" she inquired. Kankuro paled slightly. Between Naruto's demonic offspring and those 3 devils, someone had the nerve to call Jinan. "I'm never babysitting again," he muttered, shuddering slightly as he walked away. Temari frowned, blinking in confusion as she wondered if her brother had taken one too many blows to the head. Do you think Naruto plans to leave Jiraiya alive? She mused, carrying the twins out of the room. It seemed unlikely, she concluded. After all, that was Kyoshi's first word. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed the content, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel, Anime Octopus, for more insightful discussions and updates. I appreciate your support.